My boyfriend proposed, then sent me an invoice for the ring. He lost it when I played his game. Me and Oliver had been dating for 3 years, and I thought everything was normal even though he was cheap about weird things. He'd calculate exactly who ate what at restaurants and make me pay for my extra sauce. He kept a spreadsheet of who paid for gas when we took turns driving. He invoiced his roommate for using too much toilet paper. But he had a good job as an accountant, and I figured he was just particular about money. We talked about marriage and looked at rings together, and he knew I liked simple gold bands, nothing fancy or expensive. My birthday was coming up, and Oliver kept hinting about a big surprise. He made reservations at the Italian place where we had our first date and told me to dress nice. I thought this was it, finally, after 3 years of dating and me dropping hints about wanting to get married. All our friends were already engaged or married, and Oliver knew I was ready. The dinner was perfect, and Oliver seemed nervous, which I thought was cute. After dessert, he got down on one knee and the whole restaurant was watching. He pulled out a ring box and gave this speech about how I made him want to be a better man, and he couldn't imagine life without me. I said yes immediately, and everyone clapped while he put the ring on my finger. It was beautiful. Exactly what I'd shown him months ago. A simple gold band with a small diamond. We kissed, and the restaurant gave us free champagne, and I was crying happy tears. Then we got home, and Oliver pulled out his laptop. He said now that we were engaged, we needed to discuss finances. I thought he meant wedding budget, but he opened an Excel sheet titled Ring Reimbursement Schedule. He'd itemized the ring cost at $3,800, including tax and insurance. He'd calculated a payment plan where I'd pay him back over 12 months with 2% interest, since that's what his savings account would have earned. I laughed because obviously this was a joke, but Oliver wasn't laughing. He said engagement rings were a joint investment in our future, and I should contribute equally. He said it wasn't fair that only men had to buy rings and modern women should pay their share. He actually had articles printed out about equality in relationships. I asked if he was serious, and he said he'd already set up automatic transfers from my account starting next week. He'd need my banking information to process the payments. He said if I really loved him, I'd want to pay for half of the symbol of our commitment. When I said that wasn't how engagement rings worked, he called me a gold digger who just wanted free jewelry. The next morning, Oliver sent me an actual invoice with payment terms and late fees. He'd CC'd his mother, Helen, who replied, all saying it was smart to protect his assets. She said too many women scammed men for rings, then broke up. She shared a story about her friend's son who never got his ring back after a broken engagement. Oliver's brother Jake chimed in saying Oliver was a genius for thinking of this. His dad Robert said he wished he'd done the same with Oliver's mom's ring 30 years ago. They were all insane. I showed my friends the invoice and they thought it was a prank until Oliver started texting them about being witnesses to our financial agreement. He asked my best friend Lisa to co-sign as a guarantor in case I defaulted. He asked my sister to confirm she'd help with payments if I lost my job. He created a shared Google Calendar with payment due dates highlighted in red. He made a thermometer chart to track payment progress like we were fundraising for charity. Week 2 of being engaged, Oliver presented me with more documents. A prenup where everything would stay separate. A bill for half of all our future dates. A contract stating I'd pay him back for any gifts over $50. A spreadsheet of projected household expenses where I'd pay 60% because I used more shampoo. He calculated that I owed him $43 for the extra water my longer showers used over 3 years. He wanted back pay for every birthday gift he'd bought me. He invoiced me for gas from when he'd picked me up for dates. He even tried to charge me for emotional labor when he listened to me complain about work. That's when I decided to play his game. I created my own Excel sheet titled Girlfriend Services 2021 to 2024. I calculated 3 years of emotional support at therapist rates, physical intimacy at escort rates, cooking at personal chef rates, cleaning at housekeeper rates, event planning for every birthday and holiday at coordinator rates, personal shopping since I bought all his decent clothes, Instagram photography because I took all his profile pictures, career coaching because I helped with his resume, social management because I organized all our friend gatherings. The total came to $487,000. I sent him the invoice with net 30 payment terms and a note that the ring payment would be deducted from what he owed me. Oliver called screaming. His voice came through my phone sharp and loud enough that I held it away from my ear. He kept saying I'd made him look stupid in front of everyone by sending that ridiculous invoice. I sat on my couch and let him finish his whole speech about how I didn't understand basic relationship dynamics. When he finally stopped to breathe, I told him my payment terms were net 30, just like his. I said I expected the first payment within the month and we could deduct the ring cost he claimed I owed from the total. The line went quiet for a second before he hung up. I went back to watching TV but couldn't focus on the show. My phone buzzed with texts from Oliver saying we needed to talk in person immediately. I ignored them and made myself dinner. An hour later, someone knocked on my apartment door so hard it rattled in the frame. I looked through the peephole and saw Oliver standing there with a folder tucked under his arm. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He pushed past me anyway and started pulling papers from the folder. He'd printed out articles from men's rights websites about women who exploited their boyfriends financially. He spread them across my coffee table like evidence at a trial. He pointed at highlighted sections about gold diggers and manipulative women. I walked to my bedroom and grabbed my own folder. I'd spent the afternoon researching financial abuse after talking to my friend who worked at a women's shelter. I laid out my articles next to his. Each one described behaviors that matched exactly what Oliver had been doing. Tracking every expense, making me justify purchases, using money to control decisions, demanding payment for normal relationship activities. Oliver picked up one article and skimmed it. His face turned red as he read the warning signs list. He dropped the papers and his whole expression changed. His eyes got watery and his voice went soft. He said he thought we were building a future together and I was destroying everything over money. He sat down on my couch without asking and put his head in his hands. I stayed standing by the Kitsmith counter. I pointed out that he made our engagement about money the second he opened that Excel sheet. I said normal people didn't invoice their partners for engagement rings. He looked up and said he was just trying to be fair and practical. I asked him if love felt like a business transaction to him. He didn't answer. My phone rang while we sat there in silence. Helen's name showed on the screen. I'd told Oliver weeks ago that I didn't want his mother calling me anymore after she sent me a long email about proper financial boundaries in relationships. I let it go to voicemail, but she called right back. I answered and put it on speaker so Oliver could hear. Helen started talking before I could say hello. She said I was being cruel to her son and destroying his happiness over petty concerns. She said no decent man would want to marry me if I kept acting like this. I interrupted her and said that was fine because I didn't want to marry someone who treated love like a business deal. Oliver reached for the phone, but I pulled it away. Helen kept talking about how I'd never understand the value of money because I'd never struggled. I told her that understanding money didn't mean weaponizing it against people you claim to love. I hung up before she could respond. Oliver left after that without taking his articles. I locked the door behind him and called Joyce. She picked up on the first ring and I told her everything that happened since I sent the invoice. She listened without interrupting until I finished. Then she said I could stay at her place as long as I needed while I figured things out. She'd been my best friend since college and knew Oliver's behavior had been getting worse over the past year. I told her I'd think about it, but we both knew I was going to take her up on the offer. The next morning I texted Joyce and asked if the offer still stood. She sent me her address and said to come whenever I was ready. I waited until Oliver left for work and then drove to our apartment. Joyce met me there with empty boxes and garbage bags. We packed my clothes first and then my personal items from the bathroom and bedroom. I left most of the furniture since Oliver had bought it and would probably want to calculate what I owed if I took anything. The engagement ring sat in a dish on my dresser. I picked it up and carried it to the Kitsmith. I left it on the counter next to the coffee maker where Oliver would see it first thing. I wrote a note on a sticky pad saying he could sell it to get back his investment since that's clearly all it meant to him. Joyce read the note over my shoulder and said it was perfect. We loaded everything into Joyce's car and my truck. The apartment looked empty with all my stuff gone. I'd lived there for 18 months and it felt strange to leave so quickly. Joyce locked up behind us and we drove to her place across town. She had a spare bedroom that she used for storage, but we cleared it out in an hour. I unpacked my clothes and set up my laptop on the desk. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Oliver asking where I was. I didn't respond to any of them. By evening, I had 17 texts and 9 emails from Oliver. The messages switched back and forth between begging me to come back and threatening to sue me for breach of contract. Some emails said he loved me and made a mistake. Others included attachments with legal documents about verbal agreements and financial obligations. I forwarded everything to Joyce, who was making dinner in the Kitsmith. She came into my room and read through the messages on my phone. She looked at me and said this was completely crazy behavior. I felt relieved that someone else saw how wrong this all was. My sister Celia showed up at Joyce's apartment that weekend with wine and Chinese food. She hugged me for a long time before saying anything. We sat on Joyce's couch and ate straight from the containers. Celia admitted that Oliver had contacted her 3 weeks ago, asking if she'd help with my ring payments if I lost my job. She thought he was joking and laughed it off. Then she got the actual invoice email and realized he was serious. She showed me the email chain on her phone. Oliver had sent her a detailed breakdown of my monthly expenses and asked her to sign as a backup guarantor. She never responded but felt guilty for not warning me sooner. Celia told me Oliver had also called our parents trying to get them to pressure me. Our dad answered the phone and listened to Oliver explain his ring reimbursement plan. Dad apparently laughed in his face and told him to grow up before hanging up. Mom called Celia right after to make sure I was okay. Hearing that Dad stood up for me made everything feel more real. My family saw what I'd been dealing with and validated that it wasn't normal. Celia opened the wine and poured 3 glasses. We spent the rest of the night talking about all the strange things Oliver had done that I'd explained away over the years. Monday morning, I went back to work for the first time since leaving Oliver. My coworker Sheldon stopped by my desk around 10. He noticed my left hand right away and asked where my ring went. I gave him the basic story about Oliver invoicing me for the engagement ring and demanding monthly payments. Sheldon's mouth fell open and he stared at me for a few seconds. He said his wife would have thrown him out a window if he'd tried something like that. Other coworkers heard us talking and came over to ask what happened. By lunch, the whole office knew about Oliver's ring invoice. Everyone agreed it was the weirdest breakup story they'd ever heard. Sheldon stopped by my cubicle later that afternoon with a concerned look on his face. He sat down in the empty chair next to my desk and lowered his voice. He told me his sister went through something similar with an ex who tracked every penny she spent and used money to control her. The ex made her keep receipts for everything and would question her purchases. He'd withhold affection if she spent money without his approval. Sheldon said his sister didn't realize it was abuse until she got out and started therapy. He pulled out his phone and texted me a contact, a therapist named Dr. Davis who specialized in financial abuse. I stared at the name on my screen and felt something click into place. That's exactly what this was. Not Oliver being quirky about money. Not him being careful with finances. This was control disguised as equality. I thanked Sheldon and saved the contact information. The next morning, I arrived at work to find my boss Karen waiting by my desk. She asked me to come to her office right away. My stomach dropped because her expression was serious. I followed her down the hall wondering what I'd done wrong. She closed the door and pulled up her email. Oliver had sent her a message at 6 that morning. He was requesting that she garnish my wages for the ring payment. He'd attached his invoice and payment schedule. He explained that I was refusing to honor my financial obligations. Karen had already forwarded it to HR with a note calling it completely inappropriate and possibly harassment. She asked if I was okay and if Oliver was bothering me. I felt embarrassed that my personal life was spilling into work. I explained the basic situation about the engagement and the invoice. Karen listened without interrupting, and her expression got more concerned. She told me HR would be reaching out and I should document everything Oliver sent me. She also said the company would support me if I needed to take any action. I thanked her and went back to my desk feeling shaken that Oliver had contacted my workplace. An hour later, the HR representative called me. Her name was Alice, and she sounded professional but kind. She explained that Oliver's email could be considered workplace harassment. She asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint against him. I thought about it for a minute. Part of me wanted to just make this all go away. But Alice said even if I didn't file now, they'd keep the email on record in case his behavior got worse. I declined to file a formal complaint but appreciated knowing I had options. Alice said to contact her immediately if Oliver showed up at the office or contacted anyone else at work. She also gave me information about the Employee Assistance Program if I wanted counseling. I hung up feeling relieved that my company was taking this seriously. That evening, I got an email from Helen. The subject line said we needed to talk. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was long and detailed. Helen wrote that Oliver had always been sensitive about money because they struggled when he was young. His dad lost his job when Oliver was 10, and they almost lost their house. Oliver watched his parents fight about bills and saw his mom cry over the checkbook. Helen said this experience shaped how Oliver viewed financial security. She wanted me to understand where he was coming from. She thought if I knew his background, I'd be more patient with his need to track expenses. I read the whole email twice. I felt a brief moment of sympathy. Growing up with financial stress must have been hard. But then I remembered the invoice sitting in my email, the spreadsheet calculating my water usage, the demand that I pay him back for listening to me talk about work. Childhood poverty didn't excuse adult financial manipulation. I hit reply and typed out a response. I told Helen I understood Oliver's background now. I appreciated her sharing that information with me, but understanding where his behavior came from didn't mean I had to accept it. Real partnership meant not weaponizing money against your partner. It meant not tracking every dollar your girlfriend spent or invoicing her for emotional support. I explained that what Oliver was doing had a name, and it was called financial abuse. I said I hoped he'd get help, but I couldn't stay in a relationship where money was used as a weapon. I sent the email and felt good about standing my ground. Helen never replied. Her silence told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. She'd rather enable her son than admit his behavior was wrong. 2 days later, Jake texted me out of nowhere. He said I was being dramatic about the whole situation. Oliver just wanted us to be equal partners financially. Modern relationships required both people to contribute. I stared at the text, feeling anger build in my chest. I opened my photos and found screenshots of Oliver's demands. The one about back pay for birthday gifts. The one charging me for emotional labor. The spreadsheet calculating my shower water costs. I sent all of them to Jake in rapid succession. Then I typed out a message asking if that sounded like equal partnership to him. Did equal partners invoice each other for listening to problems? Did they demand reimbursement for gifts given years ago? Did they calculate the cost of water their girlfriend used? Jake read the messages immediately. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear several times. Then nothing. He stopped responding completely. I sat on Joyce's couch that night thinking about Jake's silence. His whole family had been enabling Oliver's worst behavior for years. Helen defending the ring invoice. Robert wishing he'd done the same thing. Jake calling Oliver a genius for his scheme. They'd created an environment where Oliver thought invoicing his fiancée was perfectly reasonable. No wonder he couldn't see how messed up his thinking was. His entire family reinforced that this was normal, that women were trying to scam men, that protecting assets mattered more than building trust. I felt sad for whoever Oliver dated next because his family would encourage the same controlling behavior. Joyce came home with Thai food and found me staring at my phone. She sat down next to me and asked what was wrong. I told her about Jake's text and his subsequent silence. Joyce suggested something I hadn't considered. She had a friend named Brittany who was a divorce lawyer. Even though I wasn't married, Brittany could explain my legal position regarding the ring and Oliver's threats. Joyce said Brittany owed her a favor and would probably consult for free over coffee. I agreed because I wanted to know if Oliver actually had any legal ground to stand on. Joyce texted Brittany right there and got an immediate response. Brittany was free Saturday morning and suggested a coffee shop near her office. Saturday came and I met Brittany at a place called The Grind. She was younger than I expected, probably early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She ordered us both lattes and we sat at a corner table. I showed her Oliver's invoice and explained the whole situation. Brittany read through everything with an increasingly amused expression. She explained that engagement rings were generally considered conditional gifts in our state. The condition was marriage. Since I was the one ending the engagement, Oliver might technically have a legal claim to get the ring back. My stomach dropped until I remembered. I told Brittany I'd already left the ring at Oliver's apartment. I wasn't keeping it. Brittany's expression changed to relief. She said that completely changed things. If I'd returned the ring, then Oliver had nothing to claim. She asked if I had proof I'd left it there. I pulled up the photo I'd taken of the ring sitting on his Kit Smith counter. Brittany nodded and said to keep that photo safe. Then she looked at Oliver's invoice again and actually laughed out loud. She said no court would ever enforce a demand for ring reimbursement from a recipient. The whole concept was absurd. Engagement rings were gifts. You didn't invoice people for gifts after the fact. Oliver's threats to sue me were completely empty. He had no legal case whatsoever. Even if he tried to file something, any judge would dismiss it immediately. Brittany said Oliver was clearly trying to intimidate me into paying him. She advised me to stop responding to his messages entirely. Block him if necessary. Don't engage with his threats or demands. The more I responded, the more he'd escalate. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Hearing from an actual lawyer that Oliver couldn't do anything made his increasingly unhinged messages seem less scary. I thanked Brittany and bought her another latte. She gave me her card and said to call if Oliver actually tried to file anything legal. She'd represent me pro bono just because the case was so ridiculous. I left the coffee shop feeling more confident than I had in weeks. That night, I watched Oliver's social media for the first time since I'd blocked his number. He posted a vague update about learning who your real friends are when times get tough. He shared an article about betrayal in relationships. He posted a quote about people showing their true colors. The comment section filled with concerned friends asking if he was okay. Several mutual friends texted me asking what happened between us. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes trying to decide what to say. Oliver was clearly setting up a narrative where I was the bad guy. He wanted everyone to think I'd wronged him somehow. I could stay quiet and let him control the story, or I could tell the truth. I opened a group chat with our closest friends and typed out a simple message. I explained that Oliver had sent me an invoice for the engagement ring, asking me to reimburse him in monthly installments with interest. I attached a screenshot of his ring reimbursement schedule. I didn't add commentary or drama, I just stated the facts and let them speak for themselves. The responses came fast. Joyce replied first with a string of shocked face emojis. Sheldon typed out a long message about how that was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. Celia sent 3 paragraphs about financial abuse and control tactics. Other friends chimed in with variations of disbelief and disgust. Most people were firmly on my side. A few asked if I was serious or if this was some kind of misunderstanding. I sent more screenshots. The invoice with payment terms. The spreadsheet of projected household expenses. The calculation for my shower water usage. Nobody asked if I was serious after that. 2 days later, I got a message from someone named Andrew, who I vaguely remembered as Oliver's friend from his accounting firm. He apologized for Oliver's behavior and said he felt terrible that things had ended this way. He admitted he'd witnessed Oliver's extreme cheapness over the years, but never realized it extended to romantic relationships. He shared a story about Oliver calculating the per-minute cost of phone calls with Helen and presenting her with a bill for exceeding her monthly allowance. Andrew said he'd always thought Oliver was joking around, but now he understood it was serious. Another friend of Oliver's named Frank reached out with a similar message. He said Oliver had always been weird about money, but he'd assumed I knew what I was getting into. He apologized for not saying something sooner about the red flags he'd noticed. I thanked them both for reaching out. It felt validating to know that other people saw how abnormal Oliver's behavior was. Oliver must have seen the group chat responses, or heard from friends because he made his own detailed social media posts the next morning. He shared screenshots of his ring reimbursement schedule with a long caption about financial equality in modern relationships. He posted links to articles about women who kept expensive rings after broken engagements. He wrote paragraphs about how engagement rings were joint investments, and both partners should contribute equally. He included graphs showing the rising cost of diamonds, and how unfair it was that men bore the entire financial burden. The post was public and dozens of people could see it. I watched the comments roll in, and they were nothing like what Oliver expected. People called him controlling. They said his behavior was weird and concerning. They pointed out that gifts don't come with invoices. They asked if he also charged his mother for birthday presents. The comments got harsher as more people weighed in. Someone said he needed therapy. Another person said no wonder his girlfriend left him. A woman shared her own story about an ex who used money to control her and said Oliver's post gave her flashbacks. Helen jumped into the comments within an hour defending her son. She wrote my full name and called me a gold digger who never appreciated Oliver. She said I'd used him for 3 years and tried to steal an expensive ring. She claimed I was manipulating the situation to make Oliver look bad, when really I was the problem. She posted that modern women wanted equality until it came time to pay for things. Several of my friends saw Helen's comments and jumped in to defend me. Joyce wrote a detailed response about how invoicing your fiancé wasn't normal behavior. Celia explained financial abuse tactics. Even some strangers who didn't know either of us started commenting that Oliver's behavior was controlling, and Helen was enabling it. One person pointed out that if Oliver thought the ring was a joint investment, then he should have discussed it before buying it, not surprised his girlfriend with an invoice after the proposal. The comment section turned into a full debate about relationship dynamics and financial control. Oliver deleted the entire post 3 hours after putting it up. I got a screenshot from Joyce within minutes. She'd captured the whole thing, including Helen's comments and all the responses. Joyce sent me a message saying we should keep the screenshots as evidence in case Oliver tried to rewrite history later. I saved everything to a folder on my laptop. I had documentation of his invoices, his emails to my boss, his social media posts, and now the public comments where his own behavior had backfired. Part of me felt bad watching Oliver's attempt to defend himself crash so spectacularly. Another part felt relieved that other people could see what I'd been dealing with. I called the therapist Sheldon had recommended and got an appointment for the following week. Her name was Dr. Smith, and she had availability on Thursday afternoon. I took a half day off work and drove to her office in a medical building downtown. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines nobody read anymore. Dr. Smith came out to greet me right on time. She was probably in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. We sat in her office and she asked me to explain why I'd come in. I spent the entire first session just telling her about the ring invoice situation. I showed her the spreadsheets and documents Oliver had created. I explained his family's response and the escalating demands. Dr. Smith listened without interrupting and took notes on a pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and confirmed that what I'd experienced was financial abuse. She explained that Oliver had used money as a tool to control and manipulate me throughout our relationship. She helped me see that his earlier behaviors weren't just quirks or being careful with money. They were red flags I'd normalized over time because they escalated gradually. She said abusers often start small with things that seem reasonable, like splitting bills fairly. Then they slowly increase the control until their partner doesn't recognize how abnormal everything has become. I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness hearing her explain it. Relief because someone with professional training validated that I wasn't overreacting. Sadness because I'd wasted 3 years with someone who saw our relationship as a business transaction. Dr. Smith gave me homework for our next session. She asked me to track all the times Oliver had used money to control or punish me during our relationship. She wanted me to write down specific incidents with dates if I could remember them. I started the list that night sitting on Joyce's couch with my laptop. I wrote down the time Oliver made me pay him back for a birthday dinner because I'd ordered an appetizer he didn't want to split. I remembered when he charged me for gas after driving me to the emergency room for a kidney infection. I added the incident where he invoiced me for half the cost of his gym membership because I'd used a guest pass twice. The list grew longer as more memories surfaced. Oliver calculating my portion of utilities based on how many hours I spent at the apartment. Oliver making me reimburse him for groceries he'd bought that I'd eaten some of. Oliver charging me for using his Netflix account even though we watched it together. I realized there were dozens of incidents I'd dismissed as him just being careful with money. Seeing them all written out in one document made the pattern obvious. Every single one involved Oliver using money as leverage or punishment. Every single one made me feel guilty for having needs or taking up space. I'd spent 3 years walking on eggshells about money while Oliver tracked every penny I might owe him. A formal letter arrived in my mailbox at Joyce's place 2 weeks later. The return address showed a law office downtown. I opened it standing in the hallway and read through legal language demanding payment for the ring plus accumulated interest. Oliver had actually hired a lawyer to threaten small claims court. The letter claimed I owed him $3,800 plus 2% interest calculated from the date of purchase. It threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 30 days. I took photos of the letter and texted them to Brittany. She called me back within an hour and asked me to forward the actual letter to her office. She reviewed everything and called again that evening. Brittany explained that the lawyer was probably just doing what Oliver paid him to do without expecting it to go anywhere. Most lawyers would write a demand letter if a client paid them, but that didn't mean they thought the case had merit. She said the letter was full of standard threatening language designed to scare people into paying. She assured me that Oliver had no legal grounds for his claim since I'd returned the ring. She asked if I wanted her to respond, or if I wanted to ignore it. I told her to respond because I wanted this documented in case Oliver escalated further. Brittany drafted a response letter explaining that I'd returned the ring and owed nothing. She included the photo evidence of the ring sitting on Oliver's Kit Smith counter with a timestamp. She noted that engagement rings were conditional gifts, and the condition had been fulfilled by my return of the property. She added that continued harassment could result in me filing for a restraining order. She sent me a copy before mailing it to Oliver's lawyer. The letter was professional but firm. It made clear that I had legal representation and wouldn't be intimidated by empty threats. Oliver's lawyer never responded to Brittany's letter. 2 weeks passed with complete silence. Brittany said that was typical and suggested the lawyer had probably advised Oliver to drop it. She explained that most lawyers wouldn't want to take a case this ridiculous to court where they'd definitely lose. The silence felt like a small victory. Oliver had tried to use the legal system to bully me, and it had backfired just like his social media post. My parents called the next evening asking if I wanted to come for dinner on Saturday. I hadn't told them much about what happened with Oliver, except that we'd broken up and I was staying with Joyce temporarily. When I arrived at their house, Mom had made my favorite lasagna, and Dad gave me a longer hug than usual. We sat down to eat, and there was this awkward silence until Dad finally said he was relieved I didn't marry Oliver. He admitted he'd always thought Oliver was strange about money, but assumed I knew what I was getting into since we'd been together 3 years. Mom nodded and mentioned she'd noticed Oliver never offered to help pay when they took us out to dinner. She said he'd always let them cover the entire bill while he sat there calculating what he was saving. I felt my face get hot because I'd never noticed that pattern before. My whole family had seen the red flags I'd been ignoring for 3 years. They'd watched Oliver take advantage of their generosity and never said anything because they thought I was okay with it. Dad said they'd discussed saying something multiple times but didn't want to interfere in my relationship. I told them about the ring invoice and everything that followed. Mom looked horrified and Dad actually got angry, saying Oliver had some nerve treating me like a business transaction. They asked if I was really okay, and I said I was getting there. The conversation shifted to practical things like my apartment search and whether I needed help with moving costs. Celia came over to Joyce's place a few days later with coffee and pastries. She sat me down and said she'd been doing research on financial abuse because what Oliver did kept bothering her. She wanted to make sure I was really okay and not just pretending to be fine. We ended up talking for almost 3 hours about how Oliver's behavior had isolated me and made me question my own judgment about normal relationship dynamics. Celia pointed out that I'd stopped suggesting we go out with friends because I didn't want to deal with Oliver calculating everyone's share of the bill. She reminded me that I'd stopped buying things I wanted because I knew Oliver would make comments about wasting money. I realized she was right about all of it. Oliver had slowly trained me to police my own spending and social life to avoid his criticism. Celia hugged me and said she was proud of me for getting out before we actually got married. She made me promise to tell her if Oliver tried to contact me again because she didn't trust him to leave me alone. I started looking at apartments online that weekend. Joyce had been amazing about letting me stay with her, but I needed my own space. The freedom of choosing a place that was entirely mine felt incredible. No one would track my utility usage or charge me for extra shampoo. No one would calculate the cost of my longer showers or invoice me for using too much toilet paper. I could buy nice coffee or order takeout whenever I wanted without guilt or explanations. I spent hours scrolling through listings and saved several possibilities to visit. The idea of living alone actually excited me instead of scaring me. I'd never lived by myself before because I'd moved in with Oliver after college. This would be completely new territory where I could figure out who I was without someone constantly monitoring my choices. Oliver somehow found out I was apartment hunting. He sent me an email with an Excel spreadsheet attached showing calculations of how much money I'd waste on rent, instead of splitting costs with him. He'd included average utility costs for one person versus 2 people sharing expenses. He'd calculated the difference over 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years to show how much I'd lose by living alone. He'd even factored in the cost of buying my own furniture instead of sharing his. The email ended with a note saying he was trying to help me make smart financial decisions. I stared at the spreadsheet for a long time, and then deleted the email without responding. Nothing I could say would make him see how twisted his thinking was. He genuinely believed he was being helpful by sending me financial calculations about why I should stay with him. The spreadsheet proved that even after everything that happened, he still saw our relationship as a business arrangement, where the numbers mattered more than anything else. I found a small 1-bedroom apartment the following week. It was on the 3rd floor of an older building with hardwood floors and big windows that let in tons of natural light. The rent was reasonable, and the landlord seemed nice when I met her for the showing. I signed the lease that same day because it felt perfect for starting over. Joyce helped me coordinate getting my remaining things from Oliver's place. We waited until a weekday when we knew he'd be at work. His spare key was still on my keychain and we let ourselves in. Most of my stuff was still in boxes from when I'd packed to leave originally. We loaded everything into Joyce's car in 3 trips. I left my key on the Kitsmith counter next to where I'd left the engagement ring weeks ago. The ring was gone now, probably back in its box somewhere. I took one last look around the apartment where I'd lived for 2 years and felt nothing except relief that I was leaving. Oliver texted me that evening. He'd sent a photo of the empty spaces where my things used to be with a message about how I was throwing away 3 years over a simple misunderstanding. He said we could work through this if I'd just sit down and talk to him reasonably about finances. He said he loved me and wanted to build a future together. He said I was being dramatic and emotional instead of logical. I read the message twice and then blocked his number. There was no misunderstanding between us. Oliver had shown me exactly who he was when he sent that first invoice. He'd shown me again with every spreadsheet and calculation and demand for payment. Blocking his number felt like closing a door I should have closed months ago. Helen started calling me from different numbers trying to get through. She'd call from her cell phone, then Robert's phone, then numbers I didn't recognize. I kept declining the calls until finally I answered one because I was tired of the harassment. Helen immediately launched into a speech about how I was ruining Oliver's life and breaking his heart. She said he was depressed and barely eating, and it was all my fault. I waited until she finished and then told her firmly that Oliver needed therapy, not a wife. I said she needed to stop enabling behavior that would prevent him from having healthy relationships. I told her that tracking every penny your partner spends isn't normal or healthy. Helen went quiet for a moment and then started crying. She admitted through tears that Robert did similar things to her with money. She said he tracked her spending and made her justify every purchase. She said he'd been doing it for their entire marriage and she'd learned to just accept it as how things were. She said she thought all men were like that about money, and women just had to deal with it. I felt sad for her, but I also knew I couldn't save her from a situation she'd chosen to stay in for 30 years. I told her gently that she deserved better too, and that what Robert did wasn't normal either. She cried harder and then hung up. She didn't call back again. I focused on settling into my new apartment over the next couple weeks. I bought a coffee maker that made fancy drinks and used it every morning without calculating the cost per cup. I ordered takeout 3 times in 1 week just because I felt like it. I bought expensive shampoo and used as much as I wanted in the shower. I left lights on in empty rooms without worrying about the electric bill. Simple things that should have always been normal felt revolutionary after 3 years of Oliver's constant financial surveillance. Joyce came over one evening with wine and we sat on my new couch watching movies. She said I seemed lighter and happier than I'd been in years. I realized she was right. The weight of constantly monitoring myself and justifying my choices had lifted. I was rediscovering who I was outside of Oliver's spreadsheets, and I liked that person a lot better. At work the next day, Sheldon stopped by my desk with his coffee and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, and he nodded but looked worried. He told me Oliver had shown up yesterday afternoon asking which floor I worked on. Security spotted him wandering around the building trying different elevators. When they asked what he was doing, he said he needed to talk to me about an urgent financial matter. Security told him to leave, but he kept insisting he had important documents I needed to sign. He pulled out a folder and tried to push past the security desk. They had to physically escort him to the parking lot while he yelled about how I was stealing from him. Sheldon said HR got involved because Oliver kept calling the main office line demanding to be connected to my extension. They filed a formal trespass warning that went into the building security system with Oliver's photo. If he showed up again, they'd call the police. I felt embarrassed that my personal drama had spilled into my workplace, but also scared. Oliver showing up at my job meant he was losing control of the situation and getting desperate. That afternoon, Brittany called and asked if I was sitting down. She said Oliver had filed a small claims lawsuit for $3,800, the exact cost of the ring. I reminded her that I'd left the ring at his apartment and even had photos proving it. Brittany laughed and said she knew, and the judge would throw this out immediately. She explained that Oliver was claiming I'd damaged the ring's resale value by wearing it. So even though he had it back, I owed him the full purchase price. His filing included screenshots of my girlfriend's services invoice as evidence of my mercenary intentions. Brittany said we could easily get this dismissed and might countersue for harassment if he kept pushing. She asked if I wanted to pursue a restraining order given the workplace incident. I said not yet, hoping Oliver would calm down once he realized the lawsuit was going nowhere. The court scheduled the hearing for 6 weeks out. Brittany assured me it was a complete waste of everyone's time, but we had to show up and present our evidence. She told me to bring the photos of the ring on his counter with timestamps, plus the text message where I said he could keep it. She'd handle the rest. Over the next few weeks, I focused on building my actual life instead of defending myself against Oliver's nonsense. I met Joyce and some other friends for dinner at a Thai place, and nobody calculated who ordered what, or split the bill down to the penny. We just divided it equally, and everyone threw in their cards. It felt so normal and easy that I almost cried. Joyce noticed and squeezed my hand under the table. Later, she told me I seemed lighter and happier than I'd been in years. I realized she was right. Without Oliver's constant financial surveillance, I could just exist without monitoring every choice I made. I bought myself fresh flowers at the grocery store just because they were pretty. I ordered a fancy latte instead of regular coffee. I left a big tip for good service without calculating the exact percentage. Small freedoms that should have always been normal felt revolutionary. I started going to the gym again and signed up for a pottery class I'd been interested in for months. Oliver used to complain about membership fees and hobby costs, so I'd stopped doing things I enjoyed. Now I was remembering who I was outside of his spreadsheets. Jake texted me out of nowhere one evening. He said he'd been thinking about everything that happened and wanted to apologize. I was surprised because Jake had been firmly on Oliver's side during the whole ring invoice situation. We met for coffee and Jake looked uncomfortable. He said watching Oliver spiral over the past few weeks had made him realize their parents' relationship with money had damaged both of them in different ways. He admitted that growing up, Robert tracked every dollar Helen spent and made her justify purchases down to the grocery items. Their mom had a separate secret bank account just to have some financial independence. Jake said he'd normalized this behavior because it was all he knew, but seeing Oliver take it even further with me had opened his eyes. He said Oliver's behavior was wrong and he should have said something earlier instead of encouraging it. I appreciated his honesty and told him so. Jake then revealed that Oliver was in therapy now. I asked if that meant Oliver recognized his behavior was problematic. Jake shook his head and explained that Oliver was depressed about the breakup, and his therapist was helping him deal with the loss. Oliver apparently spent sessions talking about how I'd betrayed him and refused to be a financial partner. The therapist was trying to help him process his feelings, not change his thinking. I told Jake I appreciated him reaching out, but I wasn't interested in reconciliation. Oliver needed to do serious work on himself before he could have a healthy relationship with anyone. Jake agreed and said he just wanted me to know he understood why I left. The small claims hearing arrived on a Tuesday morning. I took the day off work and met Brittany at the courthouse. Oliver was already there in the hallway with 3 massive binders full of documentation. He had the original ring receipt, the insurance policy, printed articles about engagement ring ownership laws, and screenshots of text conversations where I'd admired the ring. He'd organized everything with colored tabs and page markers like he was presenting a corporate audit. The judge called our case and we filed into the small courtroom. Oliver went first and launched into a detailed presentation about the ring purchase. He explained how he'd researched the best value, compared prices at multiple jewelers, and selected a ring that matched my stated preferences. He showed the receipt with the $3,800 total highlighted. Then he explained that while he'd given me the ring as an engagement gift, I'd broken the engagement and therefore owed him reimbursement. The judge asked if he had the ring back. Oliver said yes, but claimed I'd worn it for weeks and diminished its resale value. He had a printout from a jeweler estimating the ring was now worth $3,200 due to wear. The judge looked increasingly annoyed as Oliver presented his case. When Oliver started explaining his girlfriend's services invoice as proof of my bad faith, the judge held up her hand and told him to stop. She asked me to present my evidence. I simply pulled out my phone and showed photos of the ring sitting on Oliver's Kit Smith counter. The photos had clear timestamps from the day I moved out. I showed the text message where I told him he could keep the ring since he cared more about its value than our relationship. The judge looked at the evidence for maybe 30 seconds. She dismissed Oliver's case and told him engagement rings are gifts, and he had no legal claim for reimbursement. She warned him about filing frivolous lawsuits that waste the court's time. Oliver tried to argue, but the judge cut him off and called the next case. The whole thing took under 5 minutes. Outside in the courthouse parking lot, Oliver tried to approach me. Brittany immediately stepped between us and told him to stay back. Oliver said he just wanted to talk and explain why the judge was wrong about the law. Brittany pulled out her phone and said if he didn't leave immediately, she'd file for a restraining order right now. She had documentation of his workplace harassment, his frivolous lawsuit, and his current attempt to contact me despite clear boundaries. Oliver's face went red, but he finally turned and walked away. I watched him get in his car and drive off. Something inside me relaxed. That last thread of connection between us, the part of me that still wondered if I'd been too harsh or misunderstood him, finally snapped. Oliver had shown me exactly who he was over and over. I was done making excuses. A week later, Jake sent me a text. Oliver was dating someone new already. Some woman he'd met through a dating app who apparently came from money. Jake said Oliver was already talking about being more careful this time and protecting his assets better. I felt genuinely sorry for whoever she was. She'd probably think Oliver's financial caution was responsible at first. Maybe she'd even appreciate his attention to detail and planning. But eventually she'd discover what I had, that Oliver didn't see relationships as partnerships, but as business transactions where every interaction had a price. I couldn't warn her, though. She'd have to learn about Oliver's issues on her own, just like I did. I met up with some friends from our old group a few weeks after the courthouse disaster. We grabbed coffee at this place downtown that had good pastries and outdoor seating. These were people who'd known me and Oliver as a couple for years, who'd been at dinners and parties and game nights where Oliver calculated everyone's exact portion of the bill. Sarah ordered a latte and muffin while Tom got plain coffee. Nobody mentioned splitting the check or tracking who spent what. It felt weird at first, like I was waiting for someone to pull out their phone and start a spreadsheet. Sarah asked how I was doing, and I gave the standard answer about being fine and moving forward. Tom interrupted and said they needed to be honest about something. He admitted they'd all been worried about me during the relationship, but nobody knew how to bring it up. Sarah agreed and said watching Oliver nickel and dime me at every restaurant made them uncomfortable, but they figured I must be okay with it, or I wouldn't stay. Another friend, Michelle, said she'd tried to hint once that Oliver's behavior seemed controlling, but I'd defended him and said he was just careful with money. They'd all talked about it in a group chat without me, trying to figure out if they should say something or mind their own business. I felt embarrassed at first, like I should have seen what they saw. But Sarah explained that when things escalate slowly over time, you normalize each new boundary crossing. The first time Oliver calculated my exact meal cost seemed quirky. By the time he was invoicing me for water usage, I'd already accepted so many smaller things that it felt like just another step. Tom said his sister went through something similar with an ex who started with small controlling behaviors and gradually ramped up to full financial abuse. The victim never sees it happening because each individual thing seems manageable compared to everything they've already accepted. We talked for 2 hours about red flags and how easy it is to make excuses for someone you love. Michelle said she wished she'd been more direct instead of hoping I'd figure it out on my own. I told them I appreciated that they cared enough to worry, even if they didn't know how to help. Having friends who validated that Oliver's behavior was actually messed up made me feel less crazy. I'd spent so long defending his quirks that hearing other people confirm he was out of line felt like permission to trust my own judgment again. My next therapy session focused on why I'd stayed with Oliver so long despite all the warning signs. The therapist asked about my childhood and how my parents handled conflict. I explained that my mom always emphasized being agreeable and not making waves. She'd tell me and Celia that good girls didn't complain or cause problems. If my dad did something that bothered my mom, she'd just adjust her own behavior instead of addressing it directly. I grew up watching her accommodate and compromise while my dad pretty much did whatever he wanted. The therapist pointed out that I'd learned early on that keeping the peace meant absorbing other people's bad behavior without pushing back. When Oliver started his financial tracking, I probably felt uncomfortable but didn't trust that discomfort enough to make it a big deal. Each time I accepted something new from him, it reinforced the pattern that my role was to be flexible and understanding. She asked what would have happened if I'd refused to pay him back for extra sauce on our third date. I admitted I'd probably worried he'd think I was difficult or high maintenance. The therapist noted that I'd prioritized Oliver's opinion of me over my own comfort and boundaries. We spent the rest of the session working on recognizing when I'm suppressing my own needs to avoid conflict. She gave me homework to practice stating boundaries in low-stakes situations, like telling a server when my order is wrong instead of just eating it anyway. Learning to trust my own judgment and set limits without guilt was going to take time, but at least now I understood why I'd tolerated Oliver's behavior for 3 years. 3 months after leaving Oliver, I woke up one Saturday and realized I hadn't thought about him in several days. My brain had stopped automatically cycling through the relationship, analyzing what went wrong or wondering if I'd overreacted. I made coffee in my quiet apartment without anyone tracking how much I used or calculating the cost per cup. I took a long shower without worrying about water bills or usage spreadsheets. I ordered takeout for dinner and didn't photograph the receipt or split it into categories. My life felt peaceful in a way it never had with Oliver, even during the good times. I'd spent 3 years in a constant low-level state of anxiety, always aware that any purchase or decision might trigger one of Oliver's financial lectures. Even when we weren't actively fighting about money, I was managing his anxieties and trying to predict what would set him off. Now I could just exist without that background stress. I went to the grocery store and bought the nice cheese without calculating cost per ounce. I replaced my worn-out shoes without justifying the expense to anyone. I met Joyce for dinner, and when she insisted on paying, I just said thank you instead of immediately planning how to pay her back. The absence of drama felt strange at first, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But gradually I adjusted to the idea that relationships didn't have to be constant negotiations and financial calculations. This was how normal people lived, without tracking every transaction or keeping score of who owed what. Joyce called me a few weeks later with an idea. Her husband Sheldon had a friend from work who was recently divorced and apparently very normal about money. She wanted to set us up for a casual dinner. Nothing serious, just to get me back out there. I hesitated because 3 months felt too soon, and I wasn't sure I was ready to date anyone. Joyce promised it would be low pressure, and if it was awful, I could leave anytime. She said his name was Andrew, and he worked in tech support at Sheldon's company. They'd been friends for years, and Sheldon vouched that Andrew was a genuinely good person who wouldn't invoice me for appetizers. I agreed to one dinner with the understanding that it was just dinner, not a relationship audition. We met at a Mexican place near my apartment on a Tuesday night. Andrew showed up on time, shook my hand, and asked what I wanted to drink. The waiter brought menus, and Andrew suggested we start with guacamole. When it arrived, he didn't photograph it or calculate how many chips each of us ate. He just ate guacamole and asked about my job. I ordered enchiladas, and he got fajitas, and when the check came, Andrew picked it up without even looking at the itemized breakdown. He paid with his card and left a 20% tip without pulling out a calculator. The whole interaction was so normal that it almost felt surreal. We talked about movies and work and our families without Andrew once mentioning budgets or expense tracking. He walked me to my car afterward and said he'd had a nice time. No mention of splitting costs or reimbursement schedules, just a regular date where someone paid for a meal without making it a financial transaction that required documentation and analysis. I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious with Andrew or anyone else. One normal dinner didn't erase 3 years of Oliver's damage or suddenly make me trust my judgment about men. But the date reminded me that Oliver's behavior was an aberration, not the standard I should expect from relationships. Most people didn't track their partner's water usage or create payment schedules for birthday gifts. Most people didn't invoice their girlfriend for emotional support or demand reimbursement for engagement rings. Andrew was just a regular person who paid for dinner without making it weird, which shouldn't have felt remarkable but did after years with Oliver. I went on a second date with Andrew the following week, and it was similarly normal. We went to a movie, and he bought the tickets without asking me to Venmo him for my half. We got popcorn, and he didn't calculate how much I ate versus how much he ate. Afterward, we grabbed ice cream and split a sundae without Andrew weighing the spoon to ensure equal distribution. Being with someone who didn't commodify every interaction felt like learning to breathe properly after years of holding my breath. I still wasn't sure if Andrew was right for me long term, but at least now I knew what normal looked like. Work called me into a meeting with my boss about 6 weeks after the courthouse incident. I thought maybe Oliver had escalated his workplace harassment again, but instead my boss offered me a promotion to senior analyst. The position came with a significant raise and more responsibility managing client accounts. She said I'd been doing excellent work, and the team respected my judgment and attention to detail. I accepted immediately, and walked out of that office feeling like I'd finally gotten something good out of the whole Oliver disaster. The promotion meant I could afford my apartment comfortably without stressing about money. I wouldn't have to track every expense or worry about unexpected costs. I had actual financial security that didn't depend on splitting everything 50-50 with someone who resented my existence. I celebrated by going to the jewelry store where Oliver had bought my engagement ring. The same salesperson recognized me and asked how wedding planning was going. I explained that we'd broken up and I was actually there to buy myself a ring. I wanted something beautiful that I chose and paid for myself, something that symbolized my commitment to my own happiness instead of someone else's approval. I picked out a simple gold band with small diamonds around it, nothing flashy but elegant and well-made. It cost more than I would have spent 6 months ago, but I had the promotion raise and I wanted this. The salesperson wrapped it up and I wore it on my right hand, as a reminder that I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth or celebrate my achievements. Celia called me the next week with a story about running into Helen at the grocery store. Our parents had been shopping and saw Helen in the produce section. Mom said Helen tried to make small talk as if nothing had happened, asking about me and Celia and acting like we were all still one big happy family. My dad apparently wasn't having it. He told Helen directly that what Oliver did to me was financial abuse, and no amount of pretending otherwise would change that fact. Helen got defensive and said Oliver was just trying to protect himself from gold diggers. My dad responded that calling your fiancé a gold digger for not wanting to be invoiced for an engagement ring showed exactly what kind of person Oliver was. Helen left her shopping cart right there in the produce section and walked out of the store. Mom felt a little bad about the confrontation, but Dad said someone needed to tell Helen the truth since she'd clearly never heard it before. Celia thought the whole thing was hilarious, and wished she'd been there to see Helen's face. I felt grateful that my dad was willing to defend me even in awkward grocery store encounters. He could have just made polite small talk and avoided conflict, but instead he stood up for me and made sure Helen knew that her son's behavior wasn't acceptable. Having family who validated my reality instead of pressuring me to make peace with Oliver made all the difference. I thought about how different everything might have been if my family had reacted like Oliver's did. If my parents had told me to be more understanding or suggested I was overreacting to normal financial planning. If Celia had sided with Oliver and said I should appreciate his fiscal responsibility. If they'd all pressured me to pay the invoice and work things out because breaking up over money seemed petty. I probably would have stayed longer, convinced myself that I was the problem, maybe even married him. Having people who validate your reality is crucial when someone's been gaslighting you about what's normal. Oliver had his entire family backing him up, telling him he was smart and protective and justified in his demands. That kind of reinforcement made him more confident in his delusions and more aggressive in pursuing them. Meanwhile, I had people telling me the truth, that his behavior was abusive and I deserved better. My therapist said that's often the difference between people who escape bad relationships and people who stay trapped in them. External validation helps you trust your own perceptions when someone's actively working to undermine them. I felt incredibly lucky that my family saw Oliver clearly and weren't afraid to say so, even when it meant awkward grocery store confrontations with his mother. 6 months after moving out, I was genuinely thriving. Work was going well, and I'd gotten positive feedback on several major projects. My apartment felt like home instead of temporary housing. I'd built up a group of friends who got together regularly for dinners and game nights where nobody calculated exact portions or kept running tabs. Joyce and Sheldon had me over frequently, and I'd started hosting people at my place too. I was seeing Andrew casually. Nothing serious yet, but comfortable and drama-free. My relationship with my family had gotten stronger through everything with Oliver. Celia and I talked more often, and my parents checked in regularly to make sure I was doing okay. Even my friendships felt more genuine now that I wasn't constantly managing Oliver's behavior or making excuses for his financial obsessions. I'd learned to set boundaries and speak up when something bothered me instead of automatically accommodating other people. The therapist said I was doing remarkably well considering how much trauma the relationship had caused. She noted that I'd done the hard work of processing what happened instead of just moving on and repeating the same patterns. I'd identified the childhood conditioning that made me vulnerable to Oliver's manipulation and actively worked to change those responses. I'd built a support system and learned to trust my own judgment. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could leave a bad situation and build something better. The life I had now was entirely my own creation, funded by my own salary and decorated according to my own taste. Nobody was tracking my expenses or questioning my choices. I was finally free. Jake texted asking to meet for coffee. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at the same place where I'd had coffee with Sarah and Tom. Jake ordered and paid for both our drinks without mentioning it, which I appreciated. He said he wanted to update me on Oliver since they were still brothers, and he figured I might want to know. Oliver was engaged again after just 5 months. The new woman was named something generic that I immediately forgot. Jake said she came from family money, old money that Oliver had definitely noticed. He'd moved fast with this relationship, going from first date to engagement in under 4 months. Jake thought the family money was why Oliver proposed so quickly. He wanted to lock her down before she realized what she was getting into. I asked if Oliver had sent her a ring invoice yet. Jake laughed and said not as far as he knew, but the relationship was still new. He figured Oliver had learned to hide his financial controlling behavior better in the beginning. The invoices and spreadsheets would probably come out after the wedding when she was more committed. Jake felt bad for whoever this woman was, but didn't know her well enough to warn her. Oliver had apparently told his family that I was financially irresponsible, and he'd found someone who understood the value of money. Jake wanted me to know that he didn't believe Oliver's version of events and thought his brother needed serious therapy. I appreciated Jake reaching out, but told him I didn't want updates about Oliver anymore. That chapter of my life was closed, and I didn't need to know who he was manipulating next. Jake understood and said he just wanted to make sure I knew the truth about what Oliver was saying. We finished our coffee and went our separate ways. I drove home feeling nothing about Oliver's engagement except maybe pity for his new victim. 3 weeks after coffee with Jake, I ran into him at the grocery store near his place. He waved and came over with his cart half full of frozen dinners and energy drinks. He said he'd been meaning to text me, but wasn't sure if I wanted to hear more about Oliver's situation. I told him I appreciated the thought, but I was genuinely okay with whatever Oliver was doing now. Jake nodded and said that was probably healthier than staying invested in his brother's mess. He mentioned that Oliver had been posting engagement photos with his new girlfriend all over social media, the kind where they're both staring at the ring instead of the camera. Jake said the woman looked happy in the photos, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she had no idea what she was getting into with Oliver's money issues. I thanked Jake for looking out for me back when everything fell apart, and he said he wished he'd spoken up sooner about how weird Oliver's behavior had gotten. We said goodbye and went our separate ways through the produce section. I got home and unpacked my groceries without thinking about Oliver once, which felt like progress. The next day at work, I realized I'd gone almost 2 full weeks without checking if Oliver had blocked me on social media or posted anything about me. My therapist had told me that indifference was the final stage of moving on, better than anger or sadness because it meant he truly didn't matter anymore. Brittany texted me the following Saturday asking if I wanted to come to a dinner party at her place. She said it would be casual with good food and interesting people, mostly women she knew from various parts of her life. I almost said no because I still wasn't great at social situations after spending 3 years with Oliver isolating me from friends, but something made me say yes. Brittany lived in a renovated warehouse loft downtown with exposed brick and huge windows. When I arrived, there were already 6 other women there, all around my age, drinking wine and laughing in the kitsmith. Brittany introduced me around, and I immediately felt comfortable in a way I hadn't expected. We ate pasta and salad around her big dining table, and the conversation flowed naturally from jobs to travel to dating horror stories. That's when I realized every woman at the table had left a financially controlling relationship. One woman named Sarah talked about her ex who made her submit itemized receipts for every purchase over $10. Another woman named Michelle described how her ex-husband had hidden money in accounts she didn't know about, while claiming they couldn't afford basic necessities. A third woman named Jennifer laughed about her ex-boyfriend who charged her rent to stay in his apartment, but wouldn't let her have a key or put her name on anything. I shared the ring invoice story and everyone groaned in recognition, not shock. They all had their own versions of men who used money as a weapon to control and diminish them. We spent hours trading stories that ranged from absurd to heartbreaking, finding comfort in knowing we weren't alone or crazy for leaving. Sarah said her ex had convinced her she was bad with money when really he was just manipulating the numbers to keep her dependent. Michelle said it took her 2 years after the divorce to stop feeling guilty every time she bought something nice for herself. Jennifer said she still sometimes caught herself calculating if she could afford basic groceries, even though she made good money now. Brittany raised her glass and said we were all survivors of financial abuse and that deserved celebrating. We clinked glasses and I felt genuinely happy for the first time in months, surrounded by women who understood exactly what I'd been through without needing lengthy explanations. The calendar notification on my phone showed it had been exactly 1 year since Oliver proposed at the Italian restaurant. I was sitting in my apartment drinking coffee and reading on a Sunday morning, the kind of peaceful routine I'd built for myself over the past 12 months. My life looked completely different now in ways I couldn't have imagined that night when Oliver pulled out his ring reimbursement spreadsheet. I had my own place that I'd decorated exactly how I wanted without anyone questioning my choices or tracking my expenses. I had friends who genuinely cared about me without keeping score of favors owed. I had a job I was good at where my boss respected my work and didn't have to deal with my ex trying to garnish my wages. I had a therapist who helped me understand how I'd ended up accepting Oliver's behavior for so long and how to avoid similar patterns in the future. Most importantly, I had myself back in a way I hadn't realized I'd lost during those 3 years with Oliver. I could buy expensive coffee without guilt, take long showers without worrying about water bills, order takeout without calculating my share down to the penny. Simple things that should have always been normal felt revolutionary after years of financial surveillance. I thought about Oliver sometimes, but without anger or sadness, just a distant awareness that he existed somewhere living his life. Jake had stopped updating me entirely, which I appreciated because I truly didn't need to know. The ring sat in a box somewhere in Oliver's apartment, or maybe he'd sold it to recoup his investment like he'd always wanted. I'd learned that love shouldn't come with invoices or payment plans or spreadsheets tracking who owed what. The right person wouldn't make me feel like caring about them was a financial transaction requiring reimbursement. I finished my coffee and opened my laptop to look at vacation destinations I could actually afford now that I wasn't paying off imaginary relationship debts. My calendar was clear, my bank account was mine alone, and my future was built on my own values, instead of someone else's twisted version of equality. The ring invoice had been the best gift Oliver ever gave me, because it showed me exactly who he was before I made the mistake of marrying him.